Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. I'm no qua, Osinachi. One lemon, Osinachi. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. Mama, Osinachi. Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. I'm no qua, Osinachi. One lemon, Osinachi. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. Mama, Osinachi. Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be jazz. I'm watching. Osinachi, I'm no kwa. Osinachi, one lemon. Osinachi, I'm watching. Osinachi, mama. Osinachi.
sí number one. Wọ́n kéré sí number one. Àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí number one.
Wọ́n kéré sí number one. Wọ́n kéré sí number one.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Hey, Osinachi, I'm no kwa, Osinachi. One lemon, Osinachi, I'm watching. Hey, Osinachi, mama, Osinachi.
Hello, Professor Tosi. We can begin the section now. Thank you.
Yes, I will. I wanted to check whether we're supposed to have 3 presenters. Is one of the presenters there on the ground?
Yes, sir. Professor Segun on ground. Online.
Okay, yeah, I can see Noah Balogun. I can see Raphael, Larry Yeton. Sorry, how do I say the surname, sir?
Okay. In my dialect, it is Lara Yeton, Talora Yeton.
Ah,
Lara Yeton, but it's been Yorubanized, so we just say Lara Yeton, but the actual pronunciation is a Lara Yeton, Talora Yeton.
Lara Yeton. Okay. Then there is also, I think we have Bonita Akimbo, but I don't know whether she's on. Anyway, we can start, and then maybe later on she would join us.
Okay.
Okay, so our panel today is on Afrobeats and Afrobeat and Afrobeats. That is Fela's Afrobeat and Afrobeats as a generic term for it, a new kind of music. We have 3 presenters or more. I think I can see my Oga Mulumide Osagbemi, and I can see that is joining through Noah Balogun. So we'll go straight to the presentations, and the first person on the program for today, it's Raphael Lara Yeton from Federal University, Oyekite. My own name is Tosin Gugi, and I'm from Marquette University. Okay, I think the third person joined us, but anyway, the first speaker, it's I don't know whether Doctor or Mr., but pardon me, I don't have your biography, so I'm not able to do much, but over to you now.
All right. Good afternoon, Prof. Good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon, online participants. My name is Raphael Shegun Lara Yeton. The title of my paper is Post-Colonial Ethos in the Poetics of Fela and Afrobeat. The bottom line is, I look at the similarities between poetry and songs, and of course, this has dominated discourses in the several times, but often a lot of people disregard the creative process that musicians put into their activities, their work, to have quality song. So the premise of this work is to look at music in line with poetry and look at the creative process as the similarity between the creative process, and to situate Fela Anikulapo Kuti as not just as a musician, but a poet and a post-colonial poet. So, and Shema Stott argues that poetry and songs are 2 artful twins. So I take my study from that, where we consider mode, meter, rhythmic flow, accent, tempo, and other attributes of songs. We'll see that poetry share the same thing in terms of rhythmic flow, so they all share the same thing. And this approach for granting the selected songs of Fela Anikulapo Kuti as poetry, it's based on stringy definitions made to interconnect with each other. And if we take away the sound, the poet's voice, if we dismiss that from the creations, definitely we are going to have bodies of lyrics that conform to the ethos of poetry. In other words, as we have in drama performance, which is fluider, so we have the singing, it's seen as the performer, like the fluider ones, while the printed one becomes the permanent thing. So the lyrics of Fela Anikulapo Kuti represent new reality. They are critiques of colonial legacies and the colonization of the neo-colonial native collaborators. And Fela specifically rely on pidgin as a form of resisting the language of colonialism, thereby decolonizing colonial structure, the colonial subject, and mental oppose all forms of dominance. And he preaches authenticity and articulates race and interrogates the problem of hybridity in his songs. Most existing post-colonial studies ignore the creative process and the principles that define the poetics of the work. But in this work, I try to situate that indeed the creative process of songs and poetry are the same. And this paper concentrates on the connection of the post-colonial issues that Fela as a poet exposes, identify the poetic qualities in his songs. They classify Fela as a post-colonial poet. This requires investigation into the structure of his creations to determine their literariness and the attributes that define them as poetry and post-colonial. There is a need for critical assessment of the process of Fela and Kuti's songs. And the aim basically is to establish the establish Fela Anikulapo as post-colonial poets and show the post-colonial ethos in his work, thereby the objective to examine the literariness and the phenomenological attributes in his songs, and to locate the post-colonial poetics and science in his creations. And of course, examine the inherent aesthetical, pragmatical, and political positions in his songs. This study examined the concept, poetry and post-colonial poetics. Fela comes from a continent that represents post-colonial history, experiences, culture, ideologies, periods, and forms of exploitation. He did not compromise poetic quality. The aesthetics of poetry, he did not compromise them in his creation. In other words, even his agitations, everything, he still embraces poetry, the quality of poetry in his presentations. This study provides a new perspective towards this categorization of Fela Kuti's songs. I classify them into four: the information, the agitation, confrontation, and cynicism. And of course, through the post-colonial reading of his texts, of his poems, readers will identify the ethos in the creations and his political commitment. It provides a new dimension towards him as a poet and not just a musician. This study adopts Boyman's post-colonial theory. That's just, it's situated in it. We're looking at the aesthetics, the creative process, and the way it is packed. The lyrics, I selected five songs of Fela Anikulapo Kuti from his discography, and I did the analysis in line with poetry. I analyzed the lyrics, analyzed the structures, analyzed the form to establish them as poetry and also establish them as post-colonial. Fela addresses the issue of mimicry, power, material inequalities, disillusion, neocolonialism, and culture, and how these work in relation to imperial superiority and hegemony. His songs written in free verse, and there's usually a call and response, which is a characteristic of oral poetry. The African European agents are berated for the exaggerated and comical sense of superiority over other Africans who have retained cultural wholeness. Like the imperialists, he sees them as not being in tune with their culture, not with their indigenous culture, and therefore they see others as uncivilized and barbaric. These mimic men are likened to songs of Okopi text songs of Lawino, the way Lawino is seen, who has disregarded his wife, Ocho, and who races after Clementina and anything Westerning in exchange for his own traditional belief. And citing an example also from Bob Marley, we can see the Babylon system can be related to Fela's own. Was in fourth track of Babylon System Survivor. We'll see the way Bob Marley metaphorically calls the imperialist system Babylon and describe it as a vampire. It says, vampire that lives on the human blood of those it exploits, sucking the children day by day. Fela's own colonial mentality, is Sorrow, Tears, and Blood, released in 1977, reels out the history of slavery, imperialism, and neocolonialism. The colonized fantasize about being like him. In Fela's words, he say, you be colonial man. You don't be slave man before, they don't release you, but now you have not released yourself. He talks about that neocolonialism, the mentality of a colonized man who has decided not to leave the shackled, but to continue to be an agent of mimicry. Fela's colonial mentality in this album captured the conceptualization of imperialism and decolonization, particularly the decolonization of the mind, which is crucial, what Bob Marley calls mental slavery. So that decolonization of the mind is very important, and that inability to achieve it what led to what's called mimicry of power, material inequalities, disillusion, and neocolonialism. Kuti's texts are indigenous, authentic in style, and structure to reflect oral African poetry. It is written in free verse, as I said earlier on, and there is a call and response, which is a major characteristic of oral poetry. And we can see that a colonial mentality it can be linked to the history of Black oral tradition, which developed into various forms of Black poetry, like the lyric, elegy, dirge, and epic. This is a major aspect of Fela's songs. Kuti's reliance on oral African tradition is clear, and is a clear resistance of the Western mode of writing. He makes use of pidgin as a language of expression, which points to the mimicry and heredities of the imperialists. The structure of Kuti's colonial mentality is disorganized, emphasizing on the historical disruptions of slavery and imperialism. Kuti engages Western exploitation of Africa, upon which his post-colonial praxis is established. Kuti reads out the history of slavery and imperialism, but adds that even after post-independence, the colonized still appropriates the other in quote, having associated the colonizer with power. The colonized fantasizes about being like him. So, Kuti accuses the Africans of mimic, and Homebiba described it as, in quote, ironic compromise. The discourse shows Africans in a state of ambivalence, mimicking the imperialists while attempting to disavow their natural, authentic self. Through the repetition of they don't release you now, but you never release yourself, in the second stanza, Kuti emphasizes the dilemma and legacy of colonialism, as there is visible cultural erosion, loss of identity, and appropriation of the colonial culture, what he calls colo mentality. A lot of Africans are still mimic men, ridding themselves of their culture, language, and identity, and embrace an exaggerated sense of white man's culture. Mimic men, Fela berates, overdo, preaches authenticity, and the mimic men dictate anything local and embrace everything foreign. In quote, the thing where Black man no good, now foreign thing that they like, no be so, he be so. The response will come, it be so. They view anything indigenous as inauthentic and have been institutionalized. Even in judicial system, he talks about it that the judge in go cack wig and jail his brother away. Kuti reminds them that they are in Africa and must be authentically African. Even the justice system, that they should embrace the traditional judicial system that preaches justice, equality, and not at the detriment of the masses or the poor people. And of course, yabis is a major thing in Fela and Kuti. So he uses it to yab the mimic men and their overzealousness. Overdo in his language refers to the exaggerated and comical sense of superiority over the Africans who have retained cultural wholeness. Like the imperialists, they see Africans that are in tune with their indigenous cultures as uncivilized and barbaric. This he preaches so much against, and he wants everybody to go back to their root and identify with their tradition. And like Kuti's men, as I said earlier, Okopitex Ocho thinks he's white man in attitude while producing ambivalence. Kuti's mimic men in colonial mentality possesses simultaneous contradictory attitudes. They cannot become the white man no matter how well they embrace his culture, his dressing, his language, and everything. In other words, no matter how well they try, they cannot be, it's a case of they cannot be holier than the Pope. No matter what they do, they cannot be the white man. Indeed, it is more important for them to identify with their culture and appreciate the tradition they have been given. And Fela, throughout his lifetime, emphasized this so much. And again, emphasizing it, colonial mentality is authentically speaks to reflect the post-colonial situation and issues through imagery. Imagery that abounds in his songs. He paints the mental picture for people to see. In every of his songs, Expensive Shit, colonial mentality, Beast of No, everything, he talks about the subjugation of the Black man, the subjugation of African traditions in exchange for foreign things. A lot of post-colonial writers rely on unrhymed poems to give them access to be expensive and authentic. Similarly, Kuti's use of rhyme is not dependent on structuralism or the imperialist canon of writing, but for convenience. That's why free verse became a major attribute of his writing. There are strong emotions expressed in his text, whereas sometimes Fela expresses anguish over the suffering and exploitation imperialism brought on the colonized. He laments so much about it, like Upside Down, a song of his, Upside Down, he talks about the disorderliness in governance, the disorderliness in culture, disorderliness among the people. So generally, it's been a sermon of authenticity of African culture and elevation of African culture rather than just racing after imperialism or neocolonialism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. So we'll now go to our second presenters, our second set of presenters. And I'll call Dr. Noah Balogun and Dr. Olumide Osagbemi. Thank you. Dr. Balogun, Dr. Osagbemi. Please, can you hear me? Dr. Raphael, can you hear me?
I can hear you, sir.
But I'm not sure they are able to hear me. I'm not sure whether Dr. Balogun and Dr. Osagbemi are able to hear me. But if you can hear me, you're on mute. So there's no way we're going to hear you unless you're on mute. Okay.
Yes, Dr. Balogun, you can go ahead, please.
I'm not sure he's able to hear us.
Oh, Dr. Balogun.
Let me type and see.
By arrangement, it's supposed to take the first shot at this. So,
Dr. Balogun, can you hear us? I don't know whether you have his number. Is it possible to call him or something?
okay, let me do that. Let me do that right away.
Dr. Noah, I think you are joining with two different devices because you are appearing in two different places.
No, there are two of them who want to present the same presentation, who wants to do the paper together.
Okay, so I think they can
So
go
that is
ahead.
why it's like,
Okay, they can go ahead and start their presentation.
yeah, but you can't hear us. That's the problem.
So I think that's their network, right? That should be their network. Because I can hear you, Professor Tosin, I can hear you vividly.
Yes. I mean, I don't even think it's I don't think it's the network because I mean I can see him moving. Maybe it's something that has to do with the sound.
Okay. Let me. Dr. Balogun, can you hear me?
But I asked Dr. Osagbemi to call him. So let's see whether that is going to work.
Okay, that's fine.
I mean, I thought the other people would. I mean, but yeah, I can't blame it.
So here is what I suggest. While we wait for him, I think Professor Raphael can. Okay, he has presented already. Oh, that's fine. That's fine. Okay. Yeah, two of them are present.
Dr. Balogun, can you hear us? We can see you moving, but man, there's no way to communicate with him, man.
I did try to call him, but he didn't pick his call. So I don't know. Maybe if you can get through, if you can solve this problem somehow, or if the problem remain unsolved, maybe I should just go ahead and just engage the
Yeah,
abstract.
maybe if you're able to help us that way, maybe that would. I think it has to do with, most definitely, it has to do with his sound system.
Yes. Okay. I mean, if I have the permission of the panel chair to go ahead, I'll just so that we don't hold
please,
the
absolutely,
rest of
sir.
the panel.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, members of this distinguished panel. I'm Olumide Olugbemi Gabriel of Afeba Allah University, together with Noah Balogun of Afeba Allah University and Tolulope Oluremi of Osun State University. The meat of our paper is on Fela's art in its totality. To some extent, we are looking at symbols and signs in relation to Fela Anikulapo Kuti and how these symbols and signs against the backdrop of semiotics used in social protests. Essentially, Fela is well known as a political ideologue. Fela is known for using his music and his art for protest, to protest from religion, social conditions in the country and the politics of the country. And he did that quite well, both physically and through much more importantly, through his art. And if you look at Fela's work, and when we talk about Fela's art now, we are not limiting it to Fela's music. We are not talking about Fela's music alone. In fact, very much we're going to try to stay away from Fela's music or Fela's song, but to look at the other things that make up Fela. And we talk about even his album cover, how he has deployed that, his poise, women, Indian hymn, even the use of body gestures, gesticulations, and the entire Fela himself, within against the background of our paper. So what we are trying to do is to deploy the tools of semiotics to interrogate some of these things, and we are not unmindful of the fact that Fela is well documented. A lot of scholars have engaged Fela. Teju Mola, Olaniyan, Shola Oloruniyomi, and there are quite a number of biographies on Fela, Carlos Moore, and the others. Our own work is taking a radical departure from that, because we are essentially going to look at Fela from the angle of semiotics and against the background of how Fela's art has been deployed or appropriated in recent protests in Nigeria, especially the NSAS protests. And we want to go a bit back to the Occupy Nigeria protests of 2012. So the work is still, it's a work in progress anyway. And the beauty of the LSA is that we feel that at LSA, we're going to get some critical feedback and comments that will ultimately make our paper better than it is now in its formative stage. And that's why about 3-4 of us are engaging that paper from different angles. Dr. Oluremi is a semiotician, and I've also done 1 or 2 works in that area, even though I'm in literature. And Noah is also going to look at it from the angle of peace and conflict. And so that's what the paper is all about. We're supposed to, we map out this presentation in such a way that Dr. Balogun will start the presentation. I'll take it up, then Dr. Oluremi will round it up. But with the disruption now, because Dr. Oluremi cannot join us, I don't know why. He had earlier tried to join. Then I told him that he cannot join until 12:45, but now I can't get hold of him. Then Noah too cannot get in. So somehow I have to be here alone. So just please just accept this presentation the way it is. And I would appreciate comments and suggestion to make the work better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's it. The other two, I think we have one more presenter, but the person couldn't.
Dr. Olubeni.
Okay, Dr. Oluremi is in now. Dr. Oluremi is in.
Yes.
But they are not showing up there.
Chair, Dr. Tosin, can you please let in Dr. Oluremi? Is available now.
Wow. The LSA admin, please, can you help bring Dr. Oluremi?
Tolulope Oluremi.
He's not here. He's not here.
He's here.
I guess
Dr. Oluremi.
I'm inside. Yes, I can hear you.
Dr. Oluremi can hear me. I'm communicating with him. He's inside. He's with us.
Where are they?
Like I'm inside. I can hear you.
He can hear you.
He's here with us. Oh, okay. Yeah. Please
yes.
go ahead and do your presentation, please.
All right. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, professors and colleagues. I want to appreciate this time. My name is Tolulope Oluremi, Osun State University. My colleague, Dr. Olubeni Gabriel, had actually given a background concerning the paper, and I also have this to contribute essentially from the linguistic aspect. Now, when we look at the man, the being called Fela, we could actually see that figure of protest, and this is actually what boils down to his works, essentially his music. Now, looking at the title of this paper, Semiotics of Social Protest and Fela's Afrobeat. Essentially, semiotics deals with signs and signification, deals with representation, references, and essentially meaning. When I look at the man Fela Anikulapo Kuti, initially Fela Ransom Kuti, we could see that this is a man that's actually, all his life is all about deviance and protests, right from the name and even from the way he dresses. I mean, he dressed while he was here. Then now going to what our paper is even all about, not really essentially about the song, but about his other areas of his life, essentially the modes, which are actually standing for something, representing something. And when we look at, just as Dr. Olugbemi said, and as we have it on the paper, the stage costumes, the artworks in his home, the shrine, and even the museum, they all stand for something. And even and other features that could be seen around around these modes. So they signify something. And trying to theorize semiotics from, we have fathers of semiotics, such as when we talk about John Locke, talk about Peirce and so on. Their major concern is that human beings will represent signs. And whatever sign we are representing has basic interpretation. And this interpretation could be unpacked when we look at it socially and perhaps culturally. So when we put Fela's features, Fela's characteristics in terms of what he represents within this context, we are able to, deliver and to establish that all these things, they actually have what they represent. They actually have a particular significations or representations. And they're not just there, they're actually leading to something, leading to societal correction, leading to political correction, leading to establishing the fact that there are wrongs. And these signs are just there to unveil what these things are. But we can't just unveil them without looking at them in certain contexts. And it is within this context that we are trying to, look at Fela and as well foreground what he represents. So basically, these symbols, this signification, this representation, and these references and meaning or interpretation that Fela, Anikulapo Kuti stands for, tend towards correction, tends towards protest, tends towards positive deviance, which society should be mindful of, and even up to this present time. Fela is gone for a long time, but his works are still reverberating and still being made reference to because of these special significations and special representation that actually represent positive protests that a society, ideal society, should look into in order to make changes. So I will stop here, and probably I think, I don't know if my other colleague, essentially, Noah Balogun, is now here. Dr. Olugbemi.
Yeah. Yes, I think we should just leave it to the panel to decide. Yes, I think we should just, Chairman, you can take over from there. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Luremi. Thank you very much. So we will open it up to the audience. If people have questions, please raise them. This is a very good time so that our presenters can respond. LSA admin, are there people in the audience who want to ask questions? I don't know whether they can hear us.
Yes, you have a question.
And is it possible to also let us see them? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Though we had a little challenges with the sound, and there was no slides for us. I think my name is Samuel. Samuel Adejube, doctoral student in Institute of African Studies. And okay, I think maybe you have to mute one. So, all right. So, the two presentation I was able to follow, the ethos and the poetic of Fela and the semiotic of social protest. Now, I actually during the presentation of the semiotic of social protest, you mentioned NSAS, and I think there was a panel too last year, LSA too, that talks about this protest NSAS, and I think I also presented a paper on that NSAS and linking them with Fela, especially when you follow Teju Molalani's book. The challenges I'm having right now is that when we look at the protest today or the ethos today that is happening today, whether during the NSAS or any other protest, we discover that most youth that are around today are not familiar with some of the music of Fela or some of the philosophy of Fela Nicola Bokuchi. They are not familiar with it. Yes, we discover that. However, they are familiar with people who term themselves Fela Reborn. Like Burna Boy, for instance, we call himself the content, maybe I would let's call it now the Fela Reborn. Let me just use the word Fela Reborn for instance. And then I think I was after my presentation last year, for instance, somebody messaged me and said, comparing Burna Boy with Fela is an abuse of what Fela has done. But despite that fact, we discovered that when it comes to protests, when it comes to social protests today and social activism, even online on Twitter, we discovered that some of these people refer themselves to Fela and they are not aware of the philosophy of Fela. So how do we merge these two, looking at the philosophy of Fela and Nicola Bokuchi then, and now with this new genre of hip-hop artists or Afrobeats with the S artists that we try to call the new one now, because I know there's a debate about what is Afrobeat and what is Afrobeats. You understand? So how do we juxtapose these two things together, even as we engage, as we keep engaging Fela and the Afrobeat? Thank you. That's my concern.
Dr. Lara Yuta, I don't know whether you want to respond, and then maybe other presenters also.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much for the contribution. Yes, the major challenge we're having right now is the bastardization of the Fela's legacies. But the beauty of the whole thing is a lot of people are picking up interest in positioning or repositioning Fela as he should be. As rightly said, the young ones are not familiar. I came across a group of young guys recently, and as you discussed Fela with them, and they were looking lost, not informed of his activities, not informed. The key thing that people just hear, the general notion is, okay, smoking, women, and like that. They were not looking at his ideology, his political contributions, effort that Fela made. And I don't hesitate in telling them that, look, what Fela did was a kind of class suicide because he needed to project his message, because of his efforts to see that people hear of what is happening in land. He gave it up for the sake of the masses. He gave it up for the sake of his ideology. He gave it up for the message he had that he needed to present to the people. And if we go through books like Fela, This Beach of a Life by Carlos Moore, we'll see where Fela even started smoking, where he started drinking, his involvement in women. So the beauty, as I said, is we are now, a lot of scholars are coming up to reposition Fela in true sense. Yes, some will get the bug, some will not get it, but it's for us never to give up in repositioning Fela in the true light that he is. Some of us will hate to say he was, because his works live on, and we are still seeing that Fela is alive, preaching the sermon, and for us to propagate it along the line. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to contribute on that, please, Chair.
Please go ahead, sir.
Yes, so Fela is Fela is arguably the avatar of social protest in Nigeria, if not in on the entire African continent. And I disagree with the last speaker on the issue of what they call the bastardization of the Fela legacy vis-a-vis the emerging Felas, or Fela reborn, as some people would like to call it. I think that what we have now, or the level of rethinking Fela that is being done from the perspective of urban youth engagement of Fela's legacy, is timely and is needed. I mean, there's no way my generation or the generation of my father we look at, say, someone like Bob Marley or Ebenezer Obey the same way. And that's the way we must also see this issue of Fela and how different people engage in Fela. It's just like the matter of the elephant and how those different people blind people would feel the elephant, would give different opinion about the elephant. Essentially, it's important that we allow the engagement of Fela from different perspectives. That is the beauty of Fela. I don't agree with the theory that those who do not, who are not looking at Fela's philosophy or the depth of his mind and his philosophy and his engagement of issues, will only pick on the side that the negative side of Fela and his lifestyle, and also engaging Fela. And that's the way they see Fela. And Fela means different things to different people, and I think we should allow them. I also study them. It might actually be within the act of deviance, because the issues that Fela engaged, they're still here with us, even worse than they were when Fela was engaging in these issues. And that's why Fela is central to the colonial and post-colonial discourses. My colleague, Dr. Oluremi, mentioned the fact that Fela started his protest with name change, the decolonization of himself. He started it with name change, by changing his name from Ransom Kuti to Anikulapo Kuti. And within the post-colonial discourse, I mean, look at the later side of the post-colonial discourses on after we chased away the white man and the colonialists, where are we with our own leaders? I mean, so the issue of protest within the framework of NSAS and other protests that we have had in Nigeria in recent times, and the centrality of Fela to this protest and the appropriation of his totems, his signs and symbol connected to Fela, it's something that will continue to engage for a very long time. And I think we should put it out there. We should continue to engage it well, and allow people to look at it from different perspectives. That's the beauty of the whole engagement for me. Thank you. That's my contribution on that.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Osagbeni. Are there more questions?
But we do not have many other questions from the attendees.
We can hear you. We can hear you, sir.
So can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so we do not have any other questions from the attendees physically present.
May I have questions? So maybe I should follow up. The questions that so that at least I think we should have roughly like 30 minutes, and it will be great to keep the discussion going.
Okay.
My first question would go to Dr. Lara Yeto. And it has to do with something that you said quite tangentially about the fact that Fela did not rhyme, and that can in fact be taken as a decolonial counter move to, writing versus orality kind of debate. And my question is, would you say that if Fela rhymed, like in other words, if he was rhyming in his song, then that would be colonial, or that would, in other words, would you consider rhyming as something that is not African, or, I mean, how do you see that?
Thank you. Rhyming is a function of, I mean, it's not limited to the colonialists. It's a function of your creations, your ethos, and what you're trying to project. I won't see that as, but I brought that on board to say his focus was not to follow the canon of this is how, I mean, we talk about Israel, the initial poet, the early poet. He didn't follow the formalist theory, the structuralist. He created his things in his own way, musical, and of course, songs, oral literature, his song still has his own rhyme. So, but what I'm saying, he didn't follow the straitjacket ways of the Europeans, of this is the prescription, this is how it should be, the ABC, the AB, all those ones. More or less, he created it to suit his purpose, just as he carved out his own language to pass his message across. So that's what I meant, sir.
Thank you very, very much. Yes, sir. Then I also wanted to follow up on what Dr. Osagbemi said about the debate on. I mean, I imagine that there isn't anybody who is working on Afrobeat or Fela's Afrobeat or Afrobeats today that won't be interested in those kinds of debate. And I say that from the perspective of my own kind of research. I've been very much interested in they call themselves newborn Fela, right? I think
yes.
I'm the newborn Fela, and it's like you rightly pointed out, it's actually very exciting in that Fela is not one thing, right? It wasn't one thing, or isn't one.
No.
The women angle, there's the counterculture of hemp and all that, and that's reality, that he was a man who had many parts, and that's Olanio described him a man full of contradictions, right? Not necessarily that the ideology was always very straightforward and very clear. But I also was wondering how you would, respond to the constant repetition of his ideology or people just using him, right, as a commodification, as a sign to authenticate their art, to authenticate their music. In other words, by presenting yourself as Fela, you earn a certain symbolic capital in the market. So I was wondering, how do we balance that? In other words, does it make sense to continue to repeat that trope, right? Without actually paying attention to what Fela really stands for. And I say that because, I know that what we do in academia also has a way. They have ways of shaping, popular discourses on ground, right? They also, it's not like we only study artists, but what we study also might have effects on, what the artists themselves are doing. So I'm wondering, where do you stand? I mean, do you think it's just all fine to, let people do whatever thing they want to do with him, or but it's also fine that other people might have counter opinions to say, well, this is not really, the ideology that Fela stood for. you're taking it in in a different direction that is not necessarily compatible with what it stood for. Do you also think that that's a very valid project in itself?
Okay, for me, I mean, for those of us who are conversant with the discourses on post-coloniality, Omibaba, we know that central to the post-colonial discourse is mimicry. And I mean, for those who, this newborn Fela and everybody appropriating Fela for one reason or the other, whether they are for commodification or for commercial purposes or for just mere an avatar of protest or a symbol or sign of protest or representation of protest. I think we should just, Fela was, I mean, I don't know. How do you put Fela? You can't put Fela in a bottle. You can't pigeonhole Fela. Fela was not straight. I mean, not in the LGBTQ straightness. I'm talking about Fela is not something you could just put in a box and just Fela was everything. Fela was anything. And so this engagement that is ongoing is appropriate. I mean, situate Fela properly. It's who Fela really is. Fela himself was not the kind of person you could say, oh, this is who Fela is, and it's just one straight-jacketed expression of who Fela is. No. So this engagement, this re-engagement, those who are rethinking Fela, we should give it to them and allow them space to operate. Why those who are against them who think that they are bastardizing the Fela legacy? I think they are the ones who really have questions to answer. Because, I mean, when it comes to Fela, there are a lot of things, quite a lot of things that you can say about Fela, both in the positive and in the negative. So if you're going to talk about Fela's ideology, Fela's philosophy, then some people will point at the vices that Fela also promoted as a way of, as a counter narrative to the idea of Fela as a legend or somebody who was a colossus, who had positive influence on society. From the socio-political angle, you will find that a lot of positives will be on the side of Fela. But if you go outside of that box or outside of that category, you are going to run into problem with moralists who are going to argue from an entirely different perspective. And you are going to find them in your heart when you sit down in your heart, even though the idea of morality is quite fluid and could be subjective at times. But somehow, those people will also have their own argument, and the argument will find space within the body of engagement of Fela. So for me, I like the fact that the urban youth movement is appropriating Fela, and the contemporary music in Nigeria, which is placing Nigeria on the world map, is also taking Fela further than Fela did himself. And that for me is the beauty of it. I was very happy when Bigate came and told the Nigerian president that his daughter said that he was going to Nigeria. Oh, you were lucky because you're going to meet with Burna Boy and all that. And Bigate also referenced the importance of Afrobeat and the way that Nigeria has been able to export Afrobeat to the world. And that's the beauty of Fela, and that's the legacy of Fela. And that's why Fela will remain for a very long time, if not till eternity, something to be studied. Fela is an art. And that is, as an art, we should engage it from different perspectives. That was my own position about this.
Thank you very, very much. LSA, do we have any other questions?
No, we do not.
Okay. Maybe are there last words from our presenters?
I think Dr. Oluremi should say something.
Yes. Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Prof. Yeah. I just want to say that Fela is a phenomenon to be studied, and we can't just juxtapose Fela with the present day Fela is someone that is sensitive to, much more sensitive to our society, and is there for correction and to establish something which is philosophy and ideologists actually speak and for ground, which today we don't really, we can't really see. Fela is actually standing the test of time. That is why we are studying him today. And we could, just as I said at the beginning, changing his name, and even as we heard while we're growing up that he was to study medicine, and he changed to study what he actually wanted to study. And I believe that this is a pointer to some other things that are representative of him, and which is actually societal sensitive onto changes that I also see that people are actually trying to foreground or showcase today. So but I can't just stop today. It's something that would endure and continue. Meanwhile, there are some other artists or whatever that we have today that we just they have limits. Their discourses that are limits, unlike Fela's discourse that is actually unlimited. So we can begin to problematize it, looking from different angles. I'll discover that we can just hand the scholarship, and that is the beauty of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
My own contribution would be to look at Fela from the angle of defiance, and within a particular time frame, we could place Fela in a time and a place. And those who are engaging Fela now, the new guys engaging Fela, also privilege deviance, and we can also fix them in a place and a time. I mean, right now in Nigeria, the issues that we are engaging have become more complex and complicated than the Fela era. And for me, this emerging Fela or this reborn Fela are also being defiant in engaging contemporary issues that we face in Nigeria. And how they engage it is within the framework of how they understand it. Whether their engagement or their own music will stand the test of time and will outlive them the way Fela's music has outlived him is left for history to judge. But I don't want us to dismiss them and see them. If we dismiss them, then we don't understand Fela, because Fela himself symbolizes defiance. And these guys, the Burna Boys of this world, the way they see Nigeria and the way they sing about Nigeria is a function of their own defiance and their own protest at what our society has become. And that is the way I want to engage their work and see their interrogation of Fela. And again, I will say before I go, that it's good seeing Dr. Tosin again. It's been a while. It's good to see you again. Proud of you. God continue to raise you up. Thank you very much. And the rest of the panel and everybody, thank you for this opportunity. Said Adenito LSA, technical crew, everybody, you've done wonderful. I was around physically. I had to travel back on Thursday and I had to join via Zoom today. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, son. Very, 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 very good to see you and to hear you also. Well, so we'll bring the panel to an end. I want to thank everybody who has presented today, Dr. Lara Yitan, Dr. Sagbemi, Dr. Oluremi. Thank you very much. And it's also great to also meet new people and to hear you talk about Afrobeat, both with the S and the one without the S. Thank you, and have a great time.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you.
Appreciate you, Paul. Thank you.